Beijing lashes out over a potential U.S. trip to Taiwan. We look at how House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is involved. Chinese-made drones are at work for U.S. government agencies. New details say departments like the FBI and Homeland Security are still buying them. The Senate gears up to vote on a bill aiming to boost semiconductor production on home soil. But there's more to it. We dig into the controversy behind the package. And Washington is earmarking over $1 billion to help counter hypersonic missile threats from Russia and China. Nearly 30 satellites will be launched in 2025, with even more to come. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for news on the diplomacy front. Beijing is lashing out over a possible U.S. visit to Taiwan. Chinese officials say they will use resolute and strong measures should House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visit the island. China's strong response follows a report from Financial Times, citing anonymous sources. The outlet says Pelosi plans to visit Taiwan in August. If that happens, she would become the highest-ranking politician to visit the island in the last 25 years. We reached out to Pelosi's office for comment, but did not immediately receive a reply. Relations with Taiwan is a sensitive subject in U.S.-China relations. During a civil war, Taiwan's current government fled from mainland China, where the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, later took power. Despite that, Beijing sees Taiwan as part of its territory, even though the communist regime never ruled the island. Beijing has also threatened to take Taiwan by force. The U.S. does not have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but Washington is required by law to provide the island with the means to defend itself. Recently, Beijing asked the U.S. to cancel its latest arms sale to Taiwan. The deal is worth over $100 million. Something to note here, Beijing maintains the world's biggest navy and Asia's biggest air force. The regime is also working to rapidly expand its military presence by boosting its nuclear arsenal, growing its control in the South China Sea, and sending record numbers of fighter jets near Taiwan. U.S. agencies are still buying Chinese-made drones. These departments include the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security.
In a hearing last week, Senator Rob Portman raised questions about the issue with two officials. Brad Weigman, Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division, and Samantha Vinograd, Acting Assistant Secretary for Law Enforcement Policy for Homeland Security.
So there's a report that last year that the Secret Service purchased 8 of DJI's drones. The FBI purchased 18 of them. So let me just ask you these questions on the record. Start with Mr. Weigman. Does the FBI currently purchase and use Chinese-made drones, yes or no?
We do.
You do. Ms. Vinograd, does DHS currently purchase and use Chinese-made drones?
DHS has prohibited the purchase of foreign-made drones, small UAS, absent waivers in very specific circumstances.
Okay, so this report that I mentioned said that the Secret Service had purchased 8 of DJI's drones. You're saying that's inaccurate?
I'm saying that with certain waivers, very specific
So
waivers.
My question to you is, are you purchasing DJI drones or not, yes or no?
With specific waivers, DHS can purchase certain
Are you
foreign-made
purchasing DJI drones, yes or no?
With certain waivers, we are purchasing certain foreign-made aircraft.
So you are?
I can follow up with more specific details.
Okay, but the answer is yes.
In a closed hearing, I can provide more specific details, sir.
Okay.
As for the Pentagon, it banned drone purchases from Chinese company DJI, but the drone maker was a major supplier for the American military before 2018. Chinese drones are also widely used by law enforcement departments across the U.S., including in New York City. The company DJI denied receiving money from the Chinese regime, but it's funded by state-backed investors. The issue has been setting off alarms in the U.S. for years, but the problem has continued. According to Financial Times, that's partly because 2 lobby groups have been working against the American Security Drone Act in Congress. If the bill is passed, it would ban the U.S. government from buying Chinese drones. The act was introduced in early 2021 by Senator Rick Scott.
Washington plans to pour over $1 billion into advanced satellites development. That funding will go towards systems to better track hypersonic missile threats. That's according to a comment from the Pentagon Monday. Defense officials announced 2 new contracts that will launch the tracking systems into orbit by 2025. Derek Turnier is the director of the Space Development Agency, part of the Defense Department. He said the contracts will provide 28 satellites, technology that will help counter threats from Russia and China. Both of those countries have been making strides in their development of hypersonic missiles. Turner told reporters on Monday that the satellites are specifically designed to face those threats, adding they will allow the U.S. to detect and track these hypersonic maneuvering vehicles and predict their impact point. Congress has provided additional funding for the program in response to concerns in the Indo-Pacific region amid China's rapid military buildup. According to Turnier, the program signifies a U.S. shift to a larger, overlapping system of satellites, meaning the country will have a greater number of cheaper satellites that can be replaced more often, with more up-to-date technology. He said the first batch of satellites would likely be followed by a larger second group of over 50 satellites. Earlier this year, the U.S., UK, and Australia announced plans to work together on hypersonic missile development. That's alongside China's escalating military aggression in the Pacific. Last October, a top U.S. military official confirmed that China had tested a hypersonic weapon, calling it a very concerning, very significant event. On the Senate floor in Washington, lawmakers are moving forward on a bill meant to lower costs and boost American microchip making. So far, the move has gotten support from both sides of the aisle. NTD's Melina Weiskup brings us more.
On Capitol Hill today, senators kicked off their procedural votes for passing the CHIPS Act. It's their first steps towards passing a bill that would grant $52 billion to U.S. chip manufacturers along with tax credits. This is in response to the global chip shortage that has contributed to inflation, particularly on products like smartphones, refrigerators, and cars. The White House has been urging Congress to pass this bill for months now, as it's one of their solutions to fighting inflation. Here's what Senate Democrats told reporters today about this bill.
I urge my colleagues, if you want to fight inflation, if you want to create more good-paying jobs here at home, bring American jobs home, if you want to keep America strong and competitive in the 21st century, support the CHIPS Act today.
This is a vote for the future. I want the Democrats to be on the right side of history, and I pray that enough Republicans will join us that we can see the science section of this bill added.
Senate Leader Chuck Schumer wants to add to this bill investments in U.S. scientific development and technology. But he says if he cannot get enough votes to add that piece into the bill, they will just move forward with the smaller, scaled-back version, including the CHIPS Act. Now, this CHIPS Act does look like it will move smoothly through the Senate. We've heard from Republicans over the past couple of months that they have support for this. Most recently, Senator John Cornyn says that we need to invest more in U.S. manufacturing here, saying that it, quote, does nothing to protect the United States economy or national security to have another manufacturing facility located somewhere else around the world. Now, this bill is just a piece of a larger bill that was originally aimed at stepping up our competition with China. That larger China competition bill has been stalled in Congress for months because the House and Senate are unable to come to agreements in key areas, such as how far to go when cracking down on Chinese espionage. So while the two chambers are still hashing out the details for that larger China competition bill, they've decided to move forward with this more scaled-back version, that is the CHIPS Act. The procedural votes have started today, and we can expect to see final passage by later this week or next. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The bill is part of a larger package that has come under controversy. In addition to boosting chip production on U.S. soil, the larger package includes other provisions that take aim at several areas: cutting prescription drug prices, increasing taxes on big corporations, and other provisions for energy and climate. But Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell said he'll block the bill if Democrats push for provisions unrelated to microchips. He later recommended separating the chip bill from the package and passing it by itself. And Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo emphasized the urgency of the effort.
My recommendation is that they move quickly. My recommendation is that it's a matter of national security, because if they don't, these chip companies are going to invest. They're going to do it outside of America.
Raimondo said President Joe Biden and his entire cabinet are on board.
It's in the interest of every American, so we can sleep easy at night knowing our national security is protected and China won't eat our lunch, to pass this bill, particularly the chips component, because that's the most time sensitive, and I hope they do the right thing.
Discussions on the proposed legislation have been going on in Congress for months. The Senate passed a version of the bill last year. The House passed its own version in February. The differences still need to be ironed out.
This is not a close call. It is a very substantial national security challenge. So the legislation that we're trying to pass is a major national security issue. It is a major economic issue, and it is one where you cannot afford to delay.
Once an agreement is reached in Congress, the bill will be sent to the White House for the president's signature.
Now, a closer look at the China competition bill. What does it actually include? And what can the U.S. do to help American companies be more competitive? We have Steve Yates with us, former Deputy Assistant to the Vice President for National Security Affairs, to explain. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right now, there's a lot of talk about the America Competes Act, especially the part about boosting semiconductors. And it's also supposed to help with, say, national security. But some say a lot of the bill is kind of recycled Build Back Better, which isn't going to make us competitive with China. So, Steve, how do you see this all balancing out?
It's a common tale with mega bills that cost hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And that really never happened in the U.S. Congress up until recently. But there's actually quite a lot in this bill that will cost more money without actually making America more competitive. It creates a new form of the Foreign Service to advocate on climate and get deployed people overseas in consulates and embassies. It has a number of reporting requirements. It's sort of a favorite pet project of Congress. Now, of course, some reports on some topics are justified and could be helpful, but the world doesn't change based on reports. And even the investment in semiconductors is somewhat questionable. Given the magnitude of the semiconductor industry, you'd need to invest in the multiple billions of dollars to really move the needle very much. And this is not anywhere near that range. And so it sort of pays lip service to trying to make America more competitive in this industry. I don't disagree with trying to support an environment conducive to semiconductors being manufactured affordably in the United States and bringing manufacturing home. But I think this really just misses the mark. And instead, it's basically Build Back Better, just put into a different form of outerwear.
On that note, it seems right now a big issue is the climate agenda. And as you touched on, Steve, part of this bill touches on that too. But it seems when it comes to China, the U.S. relies on China a lot in terms of solar production. So is this a conflict of interest? Is this going to hinder us in being competitive with China?
It should hinder the bill. I mean, it's with some great controversy that we have to struggle about whether we're going to add tariffs onto goods that come from China for justifiable reasons, from theft of intellectual property to other unfair trade practices, and then have to find some kind of relationship of dependency that stands in the way of that, because we have become overly dependent on China for some critical inputs, including solar panels, when there's a demand for those in the United States. So I think it's something that should cause the people who are the authors of this bill to rethink their approach. I think what they're looking for is an election season way of saying, we're tough on China and we want to make America competitive, and we'd like to use the taxpayer money to do it, when in reality, they're not actually being very tough on China. They're not actually making America more competitive. And if they're serious, they'd pull back and have separate bills that were targeted at, say, malign influences of the Chinese Communist Party in the United States, trying to influence big tech, politics, entertainment, etc. And then they would step back and say, let's have a China trade and investment bill. that looked at that sector holistically.
And Steve, you kind of touched on this a little bit already, but what would be in a bill that's actually competitive with China? What would that look like? Is it separate bills, or how would that play out?
Well, number one, I don't think it's really the federal government's first job to help an industry be more competitive in the United States. I think its first job is to make sure that China doesn't have some unfair advantage by the Communist Party manipulating markets, manipulating people, manipulating data, and also violating the rules of so-called international bodies. And so I think the first job of the federal government is to prove effectiveness in blocking the cheating or manipulation. Second, I think that we could do a lot more if we were really serious about this to focus on hardening our home and making sure that everything was done a little bit better in the United States, from enforcement of the law, making sure that people are treated equally, others don't have an unfair advantage like China, but working with our allies. Our Japanese ally has given a government incentive for their companies to onshore as much as they can from China back to Japan. Well, if other allies are doing that, maybe the United States, if we're not ready to spend the multiple billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars to onshore this industry to the United States, maybe we should be collaborating with allies to make sure that the supply chain and manufacturing chain is at least safe-shored out of CCP influence.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for more than a year. Here's what to look out for in our second half. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is calling out China's trade practices in talks with South Korea. Other comments touch on what Beijing is doing to mitigate its growing real estate crisis, driven by home buyers who are refusing to pay their mortgages. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Appbok TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer, and see you tomorrow.
The 2022 NTD 8th International Chinese Vocal Competition will be held from September 29th to October 2nd at the Merkin Hall of Kaufman Music Center in New York City. The competition is honored to have specially invited vocalists with the world-renowned Shen Yun Performing Arts to serve on its panel of judges. The gold award is $10,000. For more information, please visit vocal.ntdtv.com.